promises are you willing to make when you hear back those responses? Which is why when I'm designing these surveys, what I make the nonprofits do is we start with a group of actions. We never start our conversations with what questions we ask. Higher response rate obviously feels good. It makes us feel it's successful. That's not the goal. The goal of a survey is to help you take the action.
You're listening to The Nonprofit Boost, where Double the Donation and industry leaders share practical tips to help you grow revenue and boost corporate fundraising at your nonprofit. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Nonprofit Boost by Double the Donation. You're here with me, your host for today, Giland Lim, and I am so glad to have you all back because today, in a world where information is power, we are talking about something that is surely on the minds of those working in the nonprofit and fundraising sector. And I am talking about from data collection to donor connection, what nonprofits should really measure to strengthen donor relationships. And of course, with me today is someone very special who knows all about this topic, who is going to share some very helpful, practical, and insightful tips and tricks to help you understand this topic more, to help you improve whatever you want regarding this field. And you know what? I'll just let her have the stage. So Meena, welcome to the Nonprofit Boost podcast, and we are so glad to have you here with us today.
Hi, Joanne. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm so excited to be talking about a topic that's on my mind. I want to say 5 days a week, but it's not, it's 7 days a week. So I am really excited to chat with you about all this. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Well, we obviously got the right person to talk about this topic. I mean, it's constantly on your mind, but of course, for those who aren't so familiar with you, so today we are with Meena Das, and she is the CEO of Namaste Data, and Data is for Everyone. And her work focuses on helping nonprofits approach data more equitably and more humanely through things like community surveys, data collection assessments, and workshops on data equity and human-centric algorithms. So, Meena, what I'm gathering is even though you always deal with data, you always find a way to connect it back to people.
Absolutely. I think data is nothing but a group of stories. That's what it is. And data is all around us all the time. The pen that I have right now here in my hand, that can be turned into data by the number of clicks it can do, the ink it has, the grip size it has. Everything around us can be turned into numbers, and those numbers have stories in it. And I am fascinated by that idea, and it shows up in my work.
Amazing. Well, I have been looking forward to this conversation and for what is surely going to be like a story time with you, because I think it sits right at the intersection of a few things that nonprofit and school leaders are feeling every single day. I mean, there is pressure to collect more data, just collecting more, just storing more. And there's also the pressure for them to prove impact, of course, to their donors, to their supporters, but also to their beneficiaries. And aside from that, an additional pressure that they are dealing with is how to personalize their fundraising and stewardship more effectively. And well, since we are in this modern world, on top of all that, there is also growing curiosity around AI. And one of the things that I really appreciate about your background, your work, and something that we at Double the Donation also always keep at the heart of all of our efforts is that you keep bringing the conversation back to something more human. Data is not just numbers, and as you said, it is a story. It's not just dashboards, not just hard, soulless reporting. It's about people, trust, context, and how organizations make better decisions about the communities and the supporters they serve. So today, what I wanted to talk about is what nonprofits and schools really should be measuring, how they can listen better through surveys and feedback, and of course, what a healthy, human-centered role for AI might actually look like in that process.
Gosh, I can't wait to chat more about that. Ask me anything. I will be promised to be open and share all examples. I'm really excited.
Thanks, Meena. So I'll kick it off with our first question. So a lot of organizations do feel this pressure to collect more data, build
Mhm.
more dashboards, prove more impact. But your work pushes people to slow down and
Mhm.
ask a more important question first. What is this data actually for?
That's exactly where my work starts. Most of my work can be, as you mentioned in my bio, Giland, is divided into two categories. It's in the data collection piece and it's in the AI, or I call it AI equity piece. Both of those pieces is about how do we make sure that the data is actually being collected and used in the most meaningful, trusted ways for the communities that we are showing up for. And you're right, I do start my data collection work with the first question to my nonprofits and foundations. Why does this data exist? Or why would you want it to exist? How is it going to support your mission? If we don't have the clarity, we won't be able to dream what we want to do with the data. If we can't dream, we can't really turn it into any kind of design or tools or actions, which ultimately affects our level of accountability of what we want to do with the data. And so it really should begin with that first why question.
What you said is really important, and it's a really great baseline for what our conversation is going to be today. And I think one of the other questions that I have on the top of my head regarding this is, what do these nonprofits and schools often misunderstand about the relationship between data collection and real donor or community connection?
Okay, let me give you an example. So I am based here in Vancouver, BC right now. And I've been living here in the Vancouver area for the last 6 years at this point. I moved from Seattle. And about 6 years ago, when I first moved, there was a grocery store. I mean, there still is the grocery store. So if any of the listeners are from Canada, they know about the store called Nesters that is here all over here in BC. So I had a Nesters. This is a grocery store next to my home when I had first moved. In the store back then was a table right when you enter on the right hand side. There was a table. I remember it had a bowl and some white colored forms, tiny forms of 15 questions, like 10 to 15 questions on the form. And these forms and the bowl were on the table. I think it was there for almost like 6 months at that point. And the form had a tiny heading that this data collection is happening from Whole Foods. And the purpose of asking you these questions is to help the BC province to work on the food insecurity. They had like this one line on the form. And then it had 15 questions asking about what are you purchasing? How much do you spend? How many people do you have in your family? What's your race, ethnicity, age, marital status? All those things in those 15 questions. And people had to fill those forms and had to drop it into the bowl to respond when they have responded. Me being a data nerd, I used to lurk around that table for a few minutes every time I went into the store. And I used to spend some time to see how many people did they fill out the form and how many responses are in those bowls. And believe me, every time I would be lurking around there for like a few minutes, never was there more than 2 or 3 responses at max. So yeah, and I used to go to the store like maybe 2 or 3 times a day because that was pandemic. Grocery store was really the only form of entertainment at that point in the world. So I did used to go to the grocery store a bunch of times, and every time there wouldn't be more than 2 responses at max. Which is when I got really curious. I had never filled out the form myself because I felt, well, I'm new here. I don't know enough. How can I contribute? But I picked up a form and started to really understand what is the issue. This is a big organization that is asking these questions. Why is this form not connecting with the respondents who are walking across? Like that store had a very huge foot traffic. If people wanted, they could have spent a few minutes to respond to those very close-ended 2, 3 choiced questions of the 15 questions. They could have easily do that. but they never did. And the reason I started to understand was that that form it had a few issues. It never had any context. It was giving just one line: we want to fight food insecurity in BC province. It was not giving why it collected the data, where would it be stored, how long would it be stored, any context. There was no context at all. That form was asking some of the most intimate personal questions, like how many kids you have, your race, your ethnicity, your identity, your immigration status, with the amount you are willing to spend, without any context. That was issue number 2 in that form. And then the issue number 3 was there was no way of connecting with someone from Whole Foods if I had any questions, if I felt uncomfortable, or if I did not see my gender identity in their response choice, and I wanted to go call them and say, hey, you can have this something else. There was no way for me to connect with any human who was doing the data collection. So anything that was making that little white form any bit of human-centric was stripped away. And so obviously, no one felt connected to the form. No one felt, or most didn't feel comfortable filling out the form. And we lost the possible way of asking a good set of questions. The part that I keep coming back to with data collection is your forms, your surveys, your feedback. It is not a one-way street. It's a two-way street. And it's a window to understand the values of the organization. So when you are doing a survey as a nonprofit, you are not just sending out questions, you are sending out words that carry and talk about your values as an organization. So they have to be incredibly, incredibly human-centric if we want to make sure we are seeing the full human in the process.
I think that's such a beautiful way to frame it. And it's actually also so easy to understand what the pain point is usually in data collection, because I think a lot of teams are not struggling from a lack of effort, because as you said, they did have the surveys right out in front where there's a lot of foot traffic. It's visible. It's easy to answer since they're in paper forms, there's a table and all that. But they are struggling from collecting information because they are not always clear on what will actually help them connect more meaningfully. And as you said, they are also not clear on how the respondents can connect with them in turn. And
Jill, can I offer one little example more? Okay,
of course.
This is when we think about the surveys, I want us to think about like this. Would we get on a bus and get to a stranger and say, hey, what is your gender identity? And hey, what is your racial identity? How much you're earning and how much you're going to eat? That stranger is going to give us looks, and we are going to hopefully feel like a little bit out of sync in asking these questions suddenly. We need to have a relationship before we ask those questions. It's just the same way. Sorry, just wanted to add that example.
Of course. And thank you also for sharing that, because I think that really just paints a clearer picture of what the respondents feel when they are being asked all these questions without, basically, it's like the respondent is seeing through a one-way window, wherein we're letting them in to all this information about our lives, our past, but in return, we can't even see where the data that we're offering up, well, most of the time freely, is going. And I would go as far as to say that in these cases, it's not always that the issue is donor willingness, but more of the friction because of this fear, the anxiety of where does my data go? But once these supporters have an easier path to see whether the company would match and also do what they would do next, and basically match the amount of information that they are asking from us, well, then more people would be more willing to take advantage of this opportunity.
100%. Data collection, we have to understand, is not a one-way street. The moment we make like 15 question survey, or unfortunately, I'm right now working on surveys that are 50 question surveys, and we are redesigning it. When you make surveys of that amount, we are asking someone to give time from their busy lives on questions without any context. suddenly that data collection becomes very extractive in that one-way street. And so when we offer context, when we offer ways to connect back with us if they have questions, when we offer thoughtfully curated subset of 20, 21 questions and not 50 to 70 questions, like we are giving them a chance to engage with us meaningfully. Most nonprofits have the biggest fear around data collection as we won't get enough response rates. Well, it's true that we might not get enough response rate, but response rate is not what we are working towards. We are working towards creating a good, solid, human-centric design that allows people to see themselves in the response choices, that allows people to see themselves in the questions. So they choose to engage with us, not as means of force or extraction, but by choice. And that is what happens when we have a two-way communication through the surveys.
Nonprofits are always being asked to do more with limited time and resources. Double the Donations virtual summits offer practical insights, expert advice, and actionable ideas to help you grow your impact. Check out the summit calendar and register at doubletheDonation.com/virtual-summits. We'll see you there.
Thank you, Meena. I think that insight is really, really valuable for everyone listening to have. And let's say that they have overcome that hurdle, that they have been transparent with how their collection goes, what it will be used for. Then I think the next challenge that they could face is deciding which data points are actually useful and which ones are just creating noise. So they have all this data from hundreds, thousands, even hundreds of thousands of respondents. And especially with those working in a small team where everyone is working a double or even triple role, of course, they want to improve the fundraising process without adding friction for their donors or their volunteers, but also without stretching themselves too thin. So I think now it comes to the question of what donor, volunteer, or supporter data points would you think are the most important and are most likely to help strengthen relationships and fundraising results?
Okay. I love that question for two reasons, because I am usually asked that question and I give the response in a few different ways, but today I want to start with a question to that same question. If a nonprofit asks me the same thing, what data points are important or what questions are important for the donor community, I want to say, would you be open to me giving you a few questions you should ask your neighbor so that your neighbor becomes friends with you? I'm hoping that the other person would say, no, I don't need you to tell me what questions I should be asking my neighbor so that my neighbor becomes friends with me. It's a little bit of the same way that I don't want our nonprofits to be looking for questions that they should be asking to their own communities, to their own donors, to build a better relationship with them. I do want the nonprofits to understand, though, that they have to map everything that they are asking with certain actions that they promise to take from those questions. So whether you are choosing to ask about demographic questions and age and gender and ethnicity, or whether you choose to ask about your donation and communication preferences, or whether you choose to ask about stewardship and future volunteering opportunities, it's up to you, because they are your community and you get to decide asking what will be most meaningful to build the relationship. It shouldn't be external people like me giving you and dictating these are the terms, which I don't want to, but I want you to think what actions you are required to take. What promises are you willing to make when you hear back those responses? Which is why when I'm designing these surveys, what I make the nonprofits do is we start with a group of actions. We never start our conversations with what questions we ask. We start with, okay, everybody who's interested in the survey in the organization, let's get in a room, let's take a big chart paper, and let's start putting onto it, what are the actions you are going to take? So then the communication team says, I want to be able to send some nice segmented newsletters, which is why I want to use the survey. And then fundraising team says, I want to know which donors are most likely to give by the end of the year. So there you have your action. The grant making team wants to know how many gendered and racial identities we have in the data. So everybody comes up with the actions they want to take, and then we start mapping those actions back into questions. It goes a little bit the same way with becoming friends with your neighbor. We need to understand what that friendship is to look like. I'm looking for someone with whom I'm going to get groceries on Sunday. Then my question would be, would you be willing to go with me for groceries on Sunday? If I need their parking spot, I'm asking a different question. So the questions, more than looking for questions, look for the actions, understand the approach of how are you willing to take those actions that your data says, and then map it back to the questions you want to ask.
I love that framing, because even in corporate giving, we see a lot of that mindset being applied. For example, for us, since our goal really is to increase workplace giving, to make it more accessible, to make people more aware of it. So in that regard, the most valuable thing for us to ask is to learn simply where someone works. And of course, if they want to share it, because that could unlock a much more relevant step afterwards. And that is when you can take action. And when you take action on that single piece of information, the results can actually be very real, and it can just snowball into a much bigger thing that really just helps not only your organization, but of course the beneficiaries that you are helping. And we've actually seen this happen with one of our case studies in Blair Academy, wherein after integrating this employer search into the giving flow, they saw a 32% increase in matching gift revenue in the first year, a 68% open rate on automated matching gift emails, and a 52% increase in identified companies offering these matching gifts to their donor base. And what I like about this example is that it's not really about collecting just more and basically hoarding information that may feel borderline invasive from like everything that you are collecting, but it's really just collecting what is relevant to you, the data points that you can take immediate action on. Because at the end of the day, this is what will get you results without clogging your pipeline, without exhausting your staff or your employees. Basically, just using the information in a more relevant way that works for you, as you have said, that it is a case-to-case basis. And I really love your point that you need to ask yourself the questions first. You don't seek it from anyone else, but basically it's just more of introspection. And
I love that.
And I think in order for you to introspect, of course, you need to know your supporters better. And as we have established repeatedly in this conversation, we don't want to make these questions feel extractive.
That's correct. I mean, when you're doing your surveys, it's really important to be able to listen. It's less about data collection, it's more about data listening.
And I think when we listen, we of course listen because we want to learn more. And at the end of it, like at the core of it all, we do not want to feel performative, or as we have said earlier, for it to be a one-sided process, for it to be a one-way street. And at the same time, since we are moving in this modern world, I think it's time to bring in AI into our conversation, something that you are also very well versed in. Because as we know, this AI can help collect, analyze, or act on that information responsibly, of course, depending on how you train your AI model. And since we are talking about a lot of things here, so we're talking about data collection, we're talking about being humane, we're talking about being effective, and we're talking about being effective here. So, how can nonprofits design surveys and feedback loops that can feel inclusive and respectful? And where do you think AI can play a helpful role in that process without replacing human judgment or trust building?
So the first part of the question, how do we make surveys more inclusive and human-centric? I'm going to say we have to ensure, like there goes definitely some best practices that we can follow to make things more inclusive on a survey. But the most important two pieces of recommendation that I would like to give is one, we want to make sure absolutely at all points in time that the survey is non-extractive. So you are not constantly asking back-to-back long questions, like 50 questions that takes about 30 minutes of time with no context. So intention one, no extraction from the survey. It's a listening tool. It's not a one-way collection tool. Intention two is response rates are not our goal. Higher response rate obviously feels good. It makes us feel it's successful. The survey is good, but that's not the goal. The goal of a survey is to help you take the actions you promise to take or you want to take from the survey. And it is to give space to people to see themselves in the questions and the response choices. Now, whether or not they choose to respond, it's up to them. But chasing response rates is not our goal of the data collection. And intention three is that when you want to make your survey inclusive, you are not just thinking about the questions. It's really important. We think questions are the most important piece to make something inclusive. But it's not just the questions, it's the response choices, it's the save and continue feature, it's the settings that we send in the marketing, it's the language we are using in the distribution, it's the distribution channel, it's the analysis of how we are doing the analysis of the survey. Most organizations miss out the opportunity of doing any reasonable inclusive analysis of the surveys. So when all of those happen, we are making something inclusive that didn't probably start with being inclusive. And how can AI help in that process? Well, AI can definitely help you do both the design and the analysis part. Obviously, it can collect data for you, but I have found for myself that the design that comes out of any Gen AI tool is only partially decent. It's not completely decent. We need still a lot of human-centric work. Like we still need our staff members to be involved, to look at the questions, to make sure they're culturally sensitive. Even when I am making like one survey in multiple languages, it loses its nuance. If I'm translating a language from English to Mandarin for the Chinese population, what it came back with is not the perfect when I sent it to the translators on my end, or even the Spanish translations, because they have nuances. The same language has nuances within the country. And so AI does a decent job in the design process, but it's not perfect. In the analysis side of things, if you want to use AI, obviously you have to be careful of not putting anything sensitive or personal, and it can help you in the analysis, the AI tools, but they still need a lot of review process, because it can hallucinate and give like random percentages, like 71% of so-and-so number said this and this. It sounds very confident, but it's not, unfortunately. So yes, AI tools can help, but there are a lot of caveats, and we need to make sure that how we are using it is actually honoring the people who chose to respond to the surveys and give their responses.
I love how you brought up respect, because we have been talking about, of course, trust, about knowing where your data goes, but I love how you integrated respect into it, that when you ask something of someone, that they are giving their time, their effort, and even a peek into their private lives, that is part of your responsibility. to them as the person conducting the survey, as the person collecting the data, not just, of course, protecting them, but respecting them.
It's important to understand that the data collection tools that we have, or for that matter, whatever we choose to do with data using AI or the data collection tools, the ultimate outcome we want out of those is care and respect and trust in the process. If our community can't feel respected, doesn't feel respected, doesn't feel seen and cared for, and can't trust us in the process, I question what is the purpose of us doing all of that effort if we are harming the trust, or we don't have our community choosing to be seen. So I think that's our ultimate goal. So whatever we choose to do, care and trust and respect, as simple as they may sound, as fundamental as they may sound, they're really the non-negotiable pieces.
And I think that distinction really matters. You brought up what has to remain human and what parts AI can assist with, of course, still with human supervision. Because what I find interesting in the world of fundraising is that better systems are not just about revenue, because we are dealing with a lot of human relationships here with our donors, our supporters, our beneficiaries. And these people are really the foundation of everything that we do. Not just the foundation, but they are also the reason why we do all this. And that is why it is so important to just build and take care of these trusts and relationships. And I want to highlight what I heard from University of Delaware. So they are one of the case studies that we did. And what I found worked so well with them is that they found that perfect distinction, that balance of what has to be done by humans and what they can ask AI for assistance for. So their team previously to this had been doing manual identification and follow-up for match eligible donors. And of course, one of the big benefits of improving their process was not just efficiency for its own sake, but rather this automation, bringing in this AI, freed up their staff time, resources, and what. So these staff can focus more on the donor and alumni relationships. And I think in an ideal world, this is how it should be, wherein humans can focus on the human side of things, and technology can focus on the more data-driven technological side of things. And this really is the key to creating this healthy balance on how to work smarter, but at the same time without harming any of the relationships that we already have. Because at the end of the day, we can't replace human connection. And the goal always is to just create more room for it.
Yeah, completely agree.
And so I want to ask a follow-up question to this. So a lot of nonprofits and schools from all sizes are probably tuning in right now. So let's scale back a bit and ponder on the question of, if it were a small team doing this, let's say they have a crowded CRM, a really long to-do list. And so the obvious question for these few people in the staff team becomes, where do they start?
Great question. Obviously, if it's a data collection project, you have to start with your, like we talked about, actions. Like, what actions do you want to take? So start with mapping on a piece of paper, on a Word doc. What actions do you need to take in the next 18 months, up to 18 months? That's how long a survey stays really fresh and useful, like 18 to 24 months. My recommendation is do a survey every year. That way you get to see anything is changing in terms of trends. But if you can't do it every year, do it at least like after 18 months. And so you can map actions. What do you need to take? Once you have your actions on a piece of paper or a piece of Word doc, you can start translating them into questions. At that point, you get to choose, do you have your own tools to do a data collection project, or Do you need to get new tools, or do you need to hire someone who has the tools and can help you to do the data collection projects? And then at that point, you start designing and using these tools and then sending out the survey. But really, the first starting step, the fundamental step, is mapping what actions you want to take in the next 12 to 18 months.
It's actionable, it's simple, it's something that, well, they can do right now, whatever tools that they may be using. So I think we have that part figured out. And now let us move on to those nonprofits or schools that are already set up with collecting their data. They're properly equipped. Their respondents are churning out what they want to see, what they want to hear. And what they want to do now is to use this data more intentionally for connection and for fundraising. So for them, what is the first shift that you would advise them to make in the next month rather?
Okay, so if you have been good at collecting data up until this point, your first job is to look at how do we find the stories in this data. So you are doing a good job on the collection part. I want you to now focus towards the analysis side of things. And I don't mean the analysis of just the last survey that you did or just the last data collection you did. I want you to pull the data from these 2 or 3 different sources, maybe your CRM, maybe your survey tools, maybe your evaluation forms, bring it all together in the same sheet, in the same Excel sheet, maybe in different tabs, and then start mapping. Can these different tabs talk to each other? Can these surveys, is there a story that I can connect with something that I'm learning from my evaluation, from my feedback form? So bring all the data, make sure that these data points are talking to each other. So you're not looking at data in any siloed way that 2024, the survey said this, but your CRM may have like a whole list of information and insights that pairing with which it can, bring something else. So look at your CRM, your existing data sources, a few past surveys, and then have it all combined and start looking into what are the broader insights. And is there anything that is changing over time? And are there any trends that we need to work on? Are there stories that we need to dig deeper into? Are there pieces or places where something is off and I need to figure out what is off and why is this off? So look for all those things. I think that's the first step for someone who is, really being consistent at the data collection part.
It's not something that feels like a huge burden or a huge challenge to them, but rather something just really actionable. It gives them that first step without them feeling like this is a giant transformation project, because at the end of the day, this shouldn't mean an overhaul of your current systems and what you're doing. Basically, you are telling them to start wherever they are. And I think that's just beautiful, not just in fundraising, but in life, in the relationships that they are building. And it's really, we always have to go back to that step to really keep on pushing for the beneficiaries that we have in mind, for the goals that we want to achieve. And again, it's a great reminder that better systems should help organizations listen better, reduce friction, and just follow up more thoughtfully. And we have had so many great insights that we have tackled, so many tips, actionable tricks and all that. But I think I just want to end with one challenge from you to our listeners. So okay. So if you're ready, then our listeners are also ready.
Do you want me to give them like a piece of homework, a piece of like a challenge that they should tackle in the next few days?
Yes, please do give them one action point that they should do this very week about the data that they are collecting.
Then this challenge can be for any listener, whether or not they have had collected data very consistently in the past or once in a while in the past. This can be applied to anybody. I want you to look in your data and find who is represented and who is not, who is in your community. If I ask you the question, who is in your community, I need you to give me 5 statements concrete statements to tell Meena, these are the people who are in my community. If you know that by the end of the week, I will know that you have spent considerable amount of time with your data, understanding who lives in it and who doesn't. If you cannot find those 5 statements by the end of the week, then that means you still have some work to do to find out who is in your community and how to get about knowing that part and that answer. So that's going to be my challenge.
Thank you, Meena. Well, even I feel the pressure to look around and learn about my community more. And thank you so much, Meena, for everything that you have shared. Overall, this has been just such a thoughtful conversation, and I really appreciate it. And for sure, the listeners also appreciate the way that you just tie people, ethics, and intentionality back into discussions that can sometimes feel overly technical or overly transactional. And you just make it sound so simple. It gives them a boost of confidence with everything that you have shared. And of course, a takeaway here is that better data is not about collecting everything. It's really about collecting what helps you understand people more clearly, understand what you want to do with the data more clearly, respond more respectfully, of course, and just build stronger relationships over time.
Thanks so much for having me here, Giland. It was such a pleasure talking about all these topics. They were really thoughtful questions, and I can't wait to listen back from the listeners how they are doing on the challenge.
Of course, let us know your thoughts. Let Meena also know your thoughts. And once again, that was Meena Das from Namaste Data. And this episode was From Data Collection to Donor Connection, what nonprofits should really measure to strengthen donor relationships. You have had me, Giland Lim, as your host, and you have been listening to the Nonprofit Boost by Double the Donation. We'll see you next time. Bye!
Here's your next steps. Visit doublethedonation.com to explore the tools and strategies that schools and nonprofits use to unlock more revenue through corporate fundraising. And if you found this video helpful, don't forget to subscribe and share the video with your team and peers.